video is why it is so difficult for psychiatrists and therapists to diagnose people with bipolar disorder. Why are they terrible at their job, and solutions I have to this problem. So this was inspired by TikTok. I recently made a video with what altered my brain chemistry trend to Cardigan by Taylor Swift, and I want to read you what I said on one of the photos. Realizing it was 5 years of seeing psychiatrists and therapists before they diagnosed me so terrible at their job. I saw about 10 different psychiatrists and therapists through the years from when I was in high school and college. They knew about my family history of bipolar disorder and could not diagnose me. Sadly, this is extremely common. On average, it takes bipolar people seeing 7 different psychiatrists or therapists before being properly diagnosed. And think about it, if you're going to a different psychiatrist and therapist, it means years have passed. You're moving to different states or different cities. And so it's a very long process. Typically, people get diagnosed with major depressive disorder rather than bipolar. And then also people might be misdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder or ADHD. Typically though, major depressive disorder. In the second part of my video, I'm gonna go over easy solutions to this problem and how things need to change in the field as a whole. There are so many heartbreaking and horrible aspects of the failure to diagnose once symptoms come out. One of the worst is that people with depression go on antidepressants, which are completely different than mood stabilizers and antipsychotics that bipolar people are on. So typically when someone is misdiagnosed with just depression on antidepressants, it makes the bipolar even worse. These years and years of not being diagnosed, bipolar people are incurring permanent brain damage by being in hypomanic, manic, and depression episodes. And it's ruining our life in so many ways. It's causing rifts in relationships. It makes it difficult to have a career, to be in school. Drug and alcohol abuse, because we don't have our medications to balance our brain. So obviously we're gonna go to illegal drugs and alcohol, homelessness. I could go on and on and on. Just a disclaimer, I am not saying that all psychiatrists and therapists are terrible or the field is terrible. I just think specifically the big weakness in the field is diagnosing bipolar. Here's a brief outline of my story of how I got diagnosed. If this one thing had not happened, I believe very strongly I still would not be diagnosed with bipolar, even though I've had 10 years of episodes. So my diagnosis story takes years. In 2016, I was officially diagnosed with bipolar by a psychiatrist. 2 years before that, one of my best friends was talking to a therapist about me and my behavior, and that therapist said it's very likely she has bipolar disorder. So my friend tells me this, and I got very offended because I didn't know what bipolar was at that time. I thought I was being told, you're emotionally crazy, you have very strong, crazy emotions. That was how I interpreted it because I didn't know what bipolar was. But this was at the back of my mind for 2 years, and I finally put it together once I had manic episodes. I also have a vivid memory from January 2014 when my friend said this therapist thinks I'm bipolar. I went to a therapist soon after that, and I have always told the psychiatrist and therapist I have bipolar disorder in my family genetically. And this therapist, I could tell that she was trying to diagnose me. She was asking me the DSM questions. In March 2015, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder by a therapist. He didn't even bring up the potential that I actually have bipolar and not MDD. And then in December 2015, I go to a psychiatrist and explain all of my symptoms and episodes. He says, you don't have bipolar disorder, but puts me on bipolar medications. Then a couple weeks later, in January 2016, I go to another psychiatrist. She says, you have bipolar disorder type 2. Then a few months later, I go to another psychiatrist who says, you have bipolar type 1, you're currently in a manic episode. So how do we get people diagnosed with bipolar soon after the first episodes happen? The most obvious and easiest solution to all of this is to do MRI scans when someone is diagnosed with depression by a psychiatrist or therapist. This is so cool. MRI scans can detect mental illness. They can detect schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, mania. But the coolest thing is that the MRI scan can tell the difference between a depression episode in major depressive disorder and a depression episode in bipolar disorder. So if you have not had a hypomanic or manic episode yet, or the therapist or psychiatrist can't detect it, you can just do an MRI scan. If the person coming to the therapist or psychiatrist is currently in a manic or hypomanic episode, you can also detect the mania through the MRI scan. This would be significantly more expensive, and I think that's why it's not used, because insurance doesn't want to be paying for it. But overall, the country would save a lot of money if we did this. I read a really interesting article on the cost of bipolar to the whole country. Are on disability, they can't work, homelessness, they're in the hospital, illegal drugs. I could go on and on and on. And so even though initially it's more expensive, it would benefit everyone in the country in a really positive way. Of course, this is still newish technology, and so I think there is a lot more they should do in researching this, but this is definitely a possible option for diagnosing people. The second thing that would really help diagnostics is bringing in the community. All of the following people need to be interviewed by the therapist or psychiatrist. If the person who potentially could have bipolar is dating, engaged to, or married to someone, that person should definitely come in. Also, roommates, family members, siblings, anyone who lives with the person or has known them for a long time. If all of these people could be interviewed for like 10 minutes, I think you could easily figure out whether or not they've had hypomanic, manic episodes. Just like my experience where my friend went to talk to a therapist about me, they said she probably has bipolar. I went to a therapist within the same month to talk about my life, and she did not say I have bipolar. This was before I'd even had a major depressive episode or manic episode, so it was like early on in my bipolar developing. One person talking about me gave me the diagnosis, and me talking to someone didn't. And so this is an amazing example in how a lot of times bipolar people cannot be a reliable narrator about their behavior and their life. And I am not at all saying that we're lying or being deceitful in any way. I just think it's extremely difficult to be self-aware about behavior, especially if someone is not having a manic episode, but is having a hypomanic episode. I think that's the hardest. Something else is that in depression and manic episodes, there's memory impairment, and so the bipolar person might not even vividly, clearly remember what they've been doing and thinking. The fact that memories are not properly being recorded, and then they're solely relying on the bipolar person to describe their behavior, is crazy. How is this the normal way to diagnose someone? One example is racing thoughts. I remember in January 2014, a therapist asking me, have you been having racing thoughts? And I said no. And I was confused by the question. And to this day, I don't know what they mean by that. People can clearly see it through my behavior though. I talk so fast. When I'm at home doing different tasks, I like run back and forth between different rooms to get stuff done because there's so much I want to do. I will have like 70 tabs open on Google Chrome on the internet. On the notes section of my phone, I have thousands of notes. Like every day I have all these ideas and things that I'm putting in there. To me, in college, I've been hypomanic for so long that these things just felt normal. This is just how my brain is because it was like that for so long. But if you have people who have known you for a long time and who live with you, they will have a really good perspective of what is normal. The third thing that would be so helpful is if therapists and psychiatrists told the person, by the way, you're showing some initial signs of bipolar. Right now, you do not fit the criteria, but pay attention to your behavior. And if these things happen, it's likely you have bipolar. I think they should literally hand out like a packet of paper, even one piece of paper, one side, could be amazing information, and they could just share signs and symptoms of like when to come back if it happens and catch the episode early. I have one video on my channel, 100 signs you have bipolar disorder, and clearly this is way more than the DSM criteria. There are all these mini symptoms that happen like in childhood and all throughout your life, like extreme empathy, sensitivity to stimuli. There's all these things that you can detect before the full episodes come out, especially if someone genetically has bipolar disorder in their family and then they're showing some of the symptoms but not the full episode yet. They should just let them know, like, by the way, you could be bipolar, come back if this happens. It was never like that. I was showing clear, obvious signs that I could be developing bipolar. Not one therapist or psychiatrist told me, by the way, you might develop full bipolar episodes in the future. Not one person gave me any information on it. It's so heartbreaking that someone could develop full episodes a month later, a year later, 2 years later. If the therapist they talked to at that point had said, watch out for these symptoms, I think it could be developing, then that person could go back to a psychiatrist or therapist immediately when they start to show the DSM criteria. Very black and white, and maybe it's mostly this way in the US because it's very black and white culture here, but it's either like, yes, you have bipolar, no, you don't have bipolar. There's never this like gray area of developing symptoms to inform a patient about. So that definitely needs to change. They need to just have pieces of paper, packets of paper with information handed out. The fact that people have to watch through dozens of my videos about bipolar when they think they might have it is really sad. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm extremely grateful that my videos have helped thousands of people, but it should be the job of the therapist or psychiatrist to be informing people of potential symptoms. So the fact that I even have my YouTube channel talking about this is a failure of the psychiatrists and therapists. Fourth thing that would help. They should have psychology class in school growing up. So I was in AP Psychology senior year of high school, and based upon what we learned about bipolar there, even depression, I didn't know I had depression for months. Definitely didn't know I was in hypomanic, manic episodes. I think they should have psychology class mandatory, maybe starting in like middle school, and it wouldn't need to be every single year, but it should be a class that everyone takes that clearly describes symptoms of mental illness so people can see it in themselves and in friends and family members. So that's the whole video. I'm gonna link on the end screen my video, 100 signs you might have bipolar, and my bipolar playlist. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.